The rain came down in sheets that October afternoon, turning the stone steps of St. Michael's Cathedral into a slick gray mirror. Inside, 250 people sat in silence so thick you could taste it, the kind that settles over a room when death arrives too young, too sudden, too wrong. The mahogany casket rested at the front, polished to a shine that seemed obscene given what it held. White lilies surrounded it in careful arrangements, their scent mixing with expensive perfume and the faint mustiness of old prayer books. Candles flickered in brass holders, casting shadows that danced across the vaulted ceiling like restless spirits searching for peace they'd never find. My name is Harper Sinclair, and the woman in that casket was more than my best friend. She was my sister in every way that counted. 25 years of friendship, of secrets whispered in the dark, of laughter that made our stomachs ache, of tears dried with the sleeves of each other's sweaters. 25 years that ended here in this cold cathedral with a finality that felt like a punch to the chest every time I remembered to breathe. Cassandra Monroe Ashford, 32 years old, elementary school teacher, mother to a 1-month-old daughter who would never know her face except in photographs. Dead from complications that made no sense, that had the doctors shaking their heads and muttering about unexpected infections and rapid organ failure, and sometimes these things just happen. Except they didn't just happen. I knew that with a certainty that sat like a stone in my stomach, heavy and cold and impossible to ignore. I stood in the third row, black dress too tight across my chest, making it hard to pull in air. Or maybe that was just the grief crushing down like a physical weight. Next to me, Dorothy Monroe sat small and brittle, her 61 years, suddenly looking like 80. She'd driven 14 hours straight from Johnson City, Tennessee, in the same Honda Civic she'd owned since Cass was a teenager. 30 years of double shifts at the waffle station, of aching feet and burning shoulders, of saving every penny so her daughter could have a shot at something better. And this was what better looked like. A closed casket because the disease had ravaged her so badly in those final weeks. A granddaughter in the NICU, 4 pounds, 3 ounces of fight hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed. A son-in-law who hadn't visited the hospital in 3 days. The priest spoke in that practiced cadence they all have about God's plan and eternal peace and seeing loved ones again in heaven. His words washed over me like white noise. I couldn't focus on anything except the photograph next to the casket, the one showing Cass with her hand on her pregnant belly, smiling at the camera with that glow everyone talks about. That's when the heavy wooden doors at the back of the cathedral creaked open. The sound cut through the priest's sermon like a blade. Every head turned. Afternoon light streamed in bright and harsh after the dim sanctuary, creating silhouettes of 2 figures in the doorway. Garrett Ashford walked into his wife's funeral like he was arriving at a mildly inconvenient business meeting. Charcoal suit that probably cost $4,000. Dark hair perfect, not a strand out of place. The kind of easy confidence that comes from 35 years of never being denied a single thing you wanted. But Garrett wasn't what made the collective gasp ripple through the pews. The woman on his arm was. Sienna Laurent strolled down that center aisle holding Garrett's hand like she had every right to be there. 28 years old, blonde hair that took hours and hundreds of dollars to maintain, the kind of manufactured beauty that came from personal trainers and strict diets and skincare regimens more expensive than most people's mortgages. Her black dress was designer Chanel, probably cut to show off her figure while barely maintaining funeral appropriateness. Red-soled Louboutins clicked against the marble floor with each step, the sound obscene in the silence. I watched them walk past my row, and something cold spread through my chest. Not surprise. I'd known about Sienna for months, ever since Cass showed me the photographs. But seeing it, witnessing this public desecration of everything decent, feeling the weight of 250 people's shock pressing down like a physical force that was different. Behind me, Dorothy made a sound I'll never forget. A wounded animal noise, raw and broken. Her small body went rigid, then crumpled. I caught her before she hit the floor, her frail frame shaking with sobs she couldn't contain. She'd buried her own mother. She'd buried her husband. And now she was burying her only child while that child's husband paraded his mistress past the casket like some kind of victory lap. Margaret Ashford sat in the front row directly in front of where Garrett was headed. 61 years old, Connecticut old money, the kind of woman who measured worth in bloodlines and bank accounts. She wore black Chanel pearls at her throat, her silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. Her face showed nothing as her son and his mistress took the seats meant for family, the places of honor right in front of the coffin, holding the woman Garrett had promised to love and cherish for the rest of his life. Sienna crossed her legs at the ankle posture, perfect, as if she were at a luncheon instead of a funeral. A tiny smile played at the corners of her mouth. The whispers started immediately. I heard phones being pulled from purses and pockets, saw screens light up as people started recording. By the time Garrett settled into his seat, I knew this whole disgusting scene was already spreading across social media, texts, flying gossip igniting like wildfire in dry brush. The priest stood frozen at the pulpit, his prepared remarks about heaven and God's grace suddenly hollow in the face of this obscenity. That's when Wallace Pritchard stood up. I'd met him only once 3 days before when he'd called me to his office in Midtown and told me things about Cass that shattered everything I thought I knew. Secrets she'd kept hidden for years, strategies she'd put in place, moves she'd made that none of us understood. He was 58, silver hair brushed back from a high forehead, piercing blue eyes that took in everything and gave away nothing. 30 years as a corporate attorney before switching to estate law. The kind of man who'd seen everything twice and was still capable of being impressed when something truly exceptional crossed his desk. He walked to the front of the cathedral with measured steps, each footfall deliberate. The priest stepped aside wordlessly, yielding the podium to this man who wasn't on the program. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice filled the space without him needing to shout. Something in his tone made people sit up straighter, made the whispers die away. Even Garrett looked up from his phone, the first flicker of unease crossing his face. "Before the service ends, I have been instructed by Cassandra to read her last will and testament here today in front of all the people she held dear." He paused, letting the words settle. His eyes scanned the crowd before landing on Garrett and Sienna in the front pew. "And everyone who betrayed her." Garrett's posture changed, just slightly, but I saw it, the confident slouch straightening into something more alert, more wary. Margaret's perfectly manicured nails dug into Garrett's arm, her knuckles going white. Wallace pulled a thick envelope from his jacket pocket, the official kind lawyers use, heavy paper and wax seal. He held it up for everyone to see before breaking the seal with slow, deliberate movements. I didn't understand what was happening. Not yet. I had no idea what Cass had been planning, what empire she'd built in the shadows, what traps she'd set, while we all thought she was just a sweet elementary school teacher making worksheets about the life cycle of butterflies. But watching the blood drain from Garrett's face as Wallace unfolded the documents, I started to realize something huge was about to unfold. To understand how we got here to this moment with my best friend dead and her husband's mistress sitting in the family section like she belonged there, I need to take you back. Before the cheating, before the secrets, before the careful plans made in darkness. Back to when it all started. Cass was born in a trailer park in Johnson City, Tennessee. The kind of place that doesn't appear on maps that everyone who lives there dreams of escaping. Her father was never part of the story. Dorothy never mentioned him, and Cass learned early it was a topic best avoided. What Cass did have was a mind like a steel trap. Intelligence that blazed so bright her teachers saw it immediately, that made guidance counselors shake their heads and say things like, "That girl could really make something of herself if she just gets a fair shot." Dorothy was going to make damn sure her daughter got that shot. She picked up every extra shift the waffle station would give her. She cleaned houses for the wealthy families on the good side of town, the ones with manicured lawns and two-car garages, scrubbing their toilets and folding their laundry, and never complaining. Every dollar that wasn't absolutely necessary for survival went into coffee cans under the mattress, into a bank account she refused to touch, no matter how desperate things got. When Cass was 17, she won a full scholarship to the University of Virginia. She cried when she read the acceptance letter standing in their cramped kitchen with linoleum peeling at the edges. Dorothy cried too, holding her daughter's future in her hands, all those years of exhaustion and sacrifice finally meaning something. Cass showed up to UVA with 2 suitcases, $300, and a determination that bordered on frightening. She worked 3 jobs to supplement the scholarship. Waitress at a local diner serving entitled college kids who didn't tip, and old-timers who barely noticed she existed. Tutor for students failing economics and business subjects she'd taught herself from library books and free online courses. Weekend custodian scrubbing toilets and making beds for students who would never bother learning her name. Despite all of it, she maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA. Dean's List every semester. Graduated with top honors and the deep respect of every professor who'd had the privilege of watching her mind work. That's where she met Garrett Ashford. He was everything she wasn't. Wealthy where she was poor. Connected where she knew no one. Confident in that particular way people who've never faced real struggle always are. His family's fortune went back generations old, Connecticut money built on smart investments and large inheritances, and deals made at country clubs and on yachts. He was failing economics when the university assigned Cass to tutor him. He walked into their first session 20 minutes late wearing a Ralph Lauren polo that cost more than everything in Cass's closet combined. He looked at her like she was the help, which I guess in his mind she was. She should have walked away right then. Looking back now, knowing everything I know, I can see all the warning signs. The casual assumption that his time mattered more than hers. The way his eyes assessed her laptop, her clothes, her shoes, like he was adding up her net worth and finding it wanting. The way he interrupted her mid-sentence to check his phone. But Garrett Ashford didn't get where he was without knowing how to manipulate people. He saw something in Cass during that first session. Maybe it was her intelligence, the way she could break down complex economic theory into concepts that finally made sense to his mediocre mind. Maybe it was her beauty, the natural kind that didn't require designer labels or heavy makeup. Or maybe it was something more cynical. Maybe he saw a young woman who'd fought for everything her whole life and figured she'd be grateful for any attention he deigned to give her. So he changed tactics, started showing up on time, brought her coffee, remembered how she liked it after being told just once, asked about her life, her background, her dreams, listened to her answers like they actually mattered. He pursued her with everything he had, showed up at the diner where she worked, ordered coffee. He never drank just so he could watch her move through her shift. Sent massive bouquets to her apartment, the kind that cost a fortune and barely fit through the door. Wrote little notes that were surprisingly thoughtful for a guy like him. Cass resisted at first. She wasn't stupid. She understood they came from different worlds, knew his family would never approve of a waitress's daughter. She knew fairy tales were for children and happy endings belonged to people who never had to worry about making rent. But Garrett was persistent, charming, incredibly good at saying exactly what she needed to hear. "I'm not like those people," he told her one night after she finally admitted why she kept him at arm's length. "The rich kids who look down on everyone else. That's not me, Cass. I love you for who you are, not where you come from. Your past doesn't matter to me." She believed him. God help her, she actually believed him. They got married 5 years later at his family's country club in Greenwich, Connecticut. I was her maid of honor, standing next to my best friend in a dress I'd found on sale, and altered myself watching her face shine with happiness that made my own heart ache with joy for her. Cass made her own wedding dress, designed and sewed every stitch by hand over 6 months. She did it because Margaret Ashford refused to pay for a gown for someone she called the help. I overheard Margaret say it didn't realize I was standing around the corner close enough to hear every toxic word. "Trailer trash doesn't deserve Vera Wang," Margaret said to one of her society friends. "No matter how much perfume you spray on it, trash is still trash." I should have told Cass. I've replayed that moment 1,000 times since, wondering if things might have been different if I'd just opened my mouth and repeated what I'd heard. But she looked so unbelievably happy that day, standing at the altar in that beautiful handmade dress, flowers woven into her dark hair, saying vows to a man she loved with every fiber of her being. I couldn't bring myself to ruin it. Maybe that makes me a coward. Maybe it makes me partly responsible for everything that came after. I've had a lot of sleepless nights to think about it, and I still don't have an answer. The wedding reception was beautiful and terrible in equal measure. Beautiful because Cass glowed, because the venue was breathtaking, because for a few hours it felt like love really could bridge the gap between their two worlds. terrible because I watched Margaret move through the crowd whispering poison into every ear, making sure everyone knew exactly what she thought of her new daughter-in-law. Give it 5 years. I heard Margaret tell a woman dripping in diamonds, her voice just loud enough for me to catch. Trailer park is trailer park. The novelty will wear off and Garrett will remember the values he was raised with. 5 years. That was Margaret's prediction. She was wrong by 3 years. The first 2 years of marriage seemed good from the outside. Cass and Garrett moved into a gorgeous apartment on the Upper East Side. He started work at a top investment banking firm called Morrison & Ashford, named after his grandfather and some long-dead partner. She found a job teaching 3rd grade at a private school, coming home with stories about her students that made her whole face light up. Then Cass discovered Garrett's gambling problem. $50,000 lost at a casino in Atlantic City. $50,000 in one weekend. Money they didn't have charged against their joint credit cards and a loan he'd taken out in both their names without her knowledge or permission. He cried when she confronted him. Real tears, or at least they looked real. Dropped to his knees in their living room and begged her to forgive him. Swore it was a one-time mistake, promised it would never happen again. Said all the things desperate people say when they're caught and not quite ready to face their demons. Cass used her inheritance to pay off his debts. Her grandmother had worked as a housekeeper for 50 years, cleaning toilets and scrubbing floors for wealthy families who probably never bothered to learn her name. When she died, she left Cass $50,000, every penny she'd saved over a lifetime of back-breaking work. Cass gave all of it to Garrett without a second thought, without resentment, because she loved him. Because she believed in their marriage, because she thought that's what a good wife was supposed to do. I told her she was out of her mind. We were sitting in my apartment in Queens drinking wine from coffee mugs because I'd broken all my actual wine glasses during a particularly enthusiastic movie night. I looked her right in the eye and said something I remember perfectly to this day. The only thing you should be betting on is whether he remembers your anniversary, not your retirement fund. She laughed and told me I worried too much. Said Garrett had learned his lesson. Insisted every marriage goes through rough patches and this was just one of theirs. I wanted to believe her. I really did. Around that same time, Cass started what she called her little hobby. She'd been creating teaching materials for her classroom lesson plans and worksheets and activities her students loved. A coworker suggested she try selling them online on a platform called Teachers Pay Teachers. Just for fun, Cass said. A little extra money. Maybe enough for a vacation someday. Garrett was completely dismissive. He came home one afternoon while Cass was on her laptop designing a lesson about butterflies and their life cycles. Looked over her shoulder with a smirk that made my fists clench when Cass told me about it later. "That's adorable, honey," he said. "You stick to teaching. Leave the business stuff to me." Cass smiled and nodded and went right back to her work. But I knew my best friend. I knew her better than anyone else in the world, or so I thought. I saw something flicker in her eyes when she told me that story, a spark of something I'd never seen before. Not hurt, not disappointment, not even acceptance. Something sharper, something colder, something that looked almost like calculation. Looking back now, I believe that was the exact moment everything shifted. The moment Cass stopped being the naive girl from Tennessee who believed in happily ever after and started becoming someone else entirely. Someone patient, someone strategic, someone dangerous. But I didn't see it then. I didn't understand what was truly happening behind my best friend's sweet smile and kind eyes. I thought she was just coping with a difficult situation. I thought she was adjusting to the reality of her marriage. I had no idea she was secretly building an empire. 6 months before the funeral, Cass was 6 months pregnant and more beautiful than I'd ever seen her. Pregnancy agreed with her in a way that defied all the horror stories other women tell. No constant nausea or swollen ankles or skin that couldn't decide whether to glow or break out. She was luminous, soft around the edges in the most perfect way, one hand always resting on her belly like she was protecting something precious, which of course she was. We met for lunch on a Thursday in early spring at a small cafe in Brooklyn that served overpriced avocado toast to Instagram influencers who only pretended to eat it. Cass was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table by the window, sunlight streaming across her face like a Renaissance painting of the perfect mother-to-be. But something was off. I could see it the second I sat down. Tension around her eyes that her smile couldn't quite erase. Tightness in her shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights and hard choices. "Tell me," I said, skipping small talk. We knew each other too well for that. Cass took a deep breath, reached into her purse and pulled out a credit card statement, slid it across the table. "I found this last week. Look at the charges. Third line from the bottom." I looked. Tiffany & Company, $4,300. "He bought you jewelry," I said. "That's sweet, I guess." "He bought jewelry," Cass corrected, her voice completely flat. "Except he never gave me any jewelry. No necklace, no earrings, no bracelet. Nothing. Maybe it's a surprise. Maybe he's waiting for—" I checked our closet, his drawers, his office at home. There's no jewelry box hidden anywhere. No receipt for a future pickup. Nothing. Her eyes met mine. "So where did $4,000 worth of Tiffany jewelry go?" I felt my stomach drop. Not because I was surprised, because I wasn't. Because I'd seen this movie before, watched friends go through variations of this same scene, and it always ended the same way. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "I'm going to find out," Cass said. She didn't confront Garrett, not immediately. That wasn't her style anymore. She'd spent too many years watching her mother handle difficult situations with strategy instead of emotion. She'd learned that knowledge was power, and that the person who acted first wasn't always the one who won. Instead, she hired a private investigator. His name was Mike Callahan, retired NYPD detective who specialized in what he gently called domestic surveillance. Cass paid him with money from her teaching materials business, which she mentioned was doing pretty well these days. I didn't think much about that comment at the time. Pretty well could mean anything. A few $100 a month, enough to cover the investigator's fee without touching the household accounts. Garrett watched like a hawk. I was about to learn the true meaning of pretty well. The photographs arrived less than a week later. Cass called me on a Wednesday night, her voice unnaturally calm, the kind of steady that comes from holding yourself together through pure force of will. She asked if I could come over. Garrett was working late. She needed me to see something. I took the subway to her Upper East Side apartment, the one I'd always secretly envied for its high ceilings and crown molding. When she opened the door, her eyes were red-rimmed and she was clutching a manila envelope to her chest like it contained a live grenade. It might as well have. She laid the photographs out on her dining room table with hands that shook. Garrett, with a blonde woman at a restaurant in Tribeca, faces inches apart in conversation that looked anything but professional, his hand resting on top of hers on the white tablecloth. Garrett, with the same woman checking into a boutique hotel in Soho, arms wrapped around each other's waists. Garrett and the woman on a beach geotag identified as the Hamptons, strolling hand in hand by the ocean like newlyweds. The woman was Sienna Laurent, 28 years old, junior associate at Morrison & Ashford. 89,000 followers on Instagram, where she posted carefully curated photos of her luxurious lifestyle. A lifestyle I suddenly understood that my best friend's husband was paying for. "How long?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure I could handle the answer. "The investigator believes at least 8 months, Cass said. "Possibly longer. It started before I got pregnant, maybe even before we knew there was going to be a baby." We sat there in silence for a long time, those photographs scattered between us like evidence from a crime scene, which in a way they were. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Cass's expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. Something that made me think of steel and ice and things that cut when you touch them wrong. "I'm going to think," she said. "I'm going to plan. And then when I make my move, I'll be ready for anything." She waited another week before confronting him. Used that time to prepare, though I had no idea then how extensive her preparations were or what they were for. When she finally showed him the photographs, they were in the kitchen of their gorgeous apartment. Cass, composed and controlled, holding the evidence in steady hands. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. Garrett didn't deny it. didn't apologize, didn't drop to his knees and beg forgiveness the way he had with the gambling. Instead, he went on the offensive. "You've been so boring ever since you got pregnant." Each word landed like a physical blow. "The only things you talk about are the baby and nursery colors and pediatricians. You go on about which stroller we should buy, and it's draining, Cass. When I come home from work, I need to be with someone who can hold a conversation about something other than pregnancy symptoms." Cass stood there 6 months pregnant, one hand instinctively moving to protect her belly as she absorbed every cruel word. "Sienna understands the pressure I'm under," Garrett continued. "She appreciates what I do. She doesn't complain about me working late or spending time at the office. She's supportive. She's exciting. She's everything you were before you turned into this incubator." Incubator. He called his pregnant wife an incubator as casually as someone might comment on the weather, but he wasn't done. "And what are you going to do about it anyway?" "Leave me on what money you have nothing without me, Cass. Your teacher's salary wouldn't even cover rent for a studio in this city. And that little craft business of yours selling lesson plans online. Please, that's a hobby, not income." He moved toward her, using his height to intimidate. "Your mother was a waitress at some roadside diner, and you're exactly like her, a nobody. A charity case I rescued. I pulled you out of that trailer park and gave you a life you could never have dreamed of. Everything you have, everything you are is because of me." His voice dropped to a whisper somehow more menacing than shouting. "You want to know what happens if you try to divorce me? I'll ruin you. You'll lose this apartment. You'll lose access to our bank accounts. You'll lose the baby. My family has the best lawyers in New York, people who've been working for the Ashford family since before you were born. Your family has nothing. No money, no influence, no power. You'd waste years fighting me in court, and when it was over, you'd have nothing left. You'd end up exactly where you started, broke and alone in some miserable apartment. You'd see our daughter on weekends if you're lucky. Is that what you want? Is that what you want for our child?" Cass said nothing, couldn't speak. Her voice stolen by the depth of his cruelty, by the sudden horrible realization that the man she'd married had never really existed. After he left that night to be with Sienna, she drove to a parking garage on 5th Avenue. Just sat there in her car for 2 hours and cried until her eyes swelled shut, until her throat burned raw, until her hands ached from gripping the steering wheel so hard. She called me from that garage, sobbing so hard I could barely understand what she was saying. My first instinct was to get in my car and drive to Manhattan to hold her and tell her it would be okay, but she refused, said she needed to think, needed to decide her next move. That night taught me something I've never forgotten. When a man tells you you're nothing without him, he's not making a threat. He's making a confession. He's revealing his deepest fear, the one that keeps him awake at night. He's terrified that you're going to figure out he's the one who's nothing without you, that all his money and power and connections mean nothing if you choose to walk away, that he's built his entire identity on making you feel small, and if you ever stood up to your full height, he'd be exposed as the pathetic, insecure little man he truly is. After those 2 hours in the parking garage, Cass wiped away her tears, took out her phone and dialed a number I didn't recognize. "Wallace," she said, her voice now firm and cold in a way that sent chills through me when she told me about it later. "It's Cassandra. I think it's time." Set everything into motion. That phone call was my first clue that the woman I thought I knew had been playing a game none of us understood. Wallace Pritchard wasn't just any attorney. He'd been friends with Dorothy for decades, going back to when he was a young prosecutor cutting his teeth on small-town cases near the waffle station. Dorothy had kept him supplied with coffee and pie, listened to him complain about impossible hours and difficult defendants. They'd formed an unlikely friendship that endured across the years and the widening gap between their circumstances. When Cass needed legal guidance on starting her business, she'd called Wallace. When she needed help structuring her company to shield it from a husband she was already learning to distrust, she'd called Wallace. And when she finally understood her marriage was built on lies and she had to protect herself and her unborn child, she'd called Wallace. 3 days after that conversation in the parking garage, Cass had a meeting with him. She insisted I come along. said she needed a witness, someone she trusted completely, who could confirm that every action she was about to take was legal, documented, and completely legitimate. We met at a small cafe in Brooklyn that Cass had chosen for one specific reason: no one from their Upper East Side social circle would ever set foot there. Wallace was already waiting when we arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a leather briefcase and an expression that gave away absolutely nothing. He laid out documents on the table with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Still, I caught a spark of satisfaction in his eyes as he detailed what Cass had created. "The company is secured in an irrevocable trust." His voice stayed low even though we had privacy. "Created before your marriage and funded solely with money you earned independently. Garrett has no legal right to any of it. He can't access the funds, he can't dissolve the trust, he can't even know about its existence unless you choose to tell him." He tapped a different file, thicker than the first. "This contains all the records of his activities, gambling losses, financial deception, solid proof of the affair including times, places, and photographs. Every lie he's told you, every promise he's broken, every instance he's dipped into your joint accounts without permission." I stared at the stack of papers, at the sheer volume of evidence my best friend had compiled while none of us had any idea what she was doing. "How long have you been collecting this?" "6 years." Cass's voice stayed perfectly steady. "It started the first time I discovered the gambling. I knew in my gut something was seriously wrong even if I tried to deny it to myself. So I began keeping a file, just to be safe. Just to be safe. She'd been married for 8 years, and for 6 of them she'd been secretly, systematically building a case against the man she'd promised to love and honor. "What's the plan now?" I asked. "Now we're patient." Wallace leaned back, fingers steepled. "Cass needs to have the baby safely first. We must ensure the child's future is legally protected before we take any action. And we must guarantee that when we do move, Garrett has absolutely no way out. No secret funds, no legal workarounds, no chance to turn this against Cass." Cass nodded, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. "And I found something else. Something that changes everything." She laid out what she called the Nevada plan. Garrett was preparing to empty their shared accounts right after the baby was born. He'd already researched fleeing to Nevada, a state with certain legal protections that made it harder to pursue financial crimes across state lines. His goal was to grab every dollar he could and disappear, leaving Cass with a newborn and massive debt. "He's been siphoning money for months," Cass explained. "Small transfers designed not to raise red flags. I only discovered it because I've been watching our bank accounts obsessively." Then she smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. The expression belonged to a chess grandmaster watching their opponent walk straight into checkmate. "He has no idea that I know. He's completely unaware that I've been a dozen moves ahead of him for years. He assumes I'm naive. He assumes I'm helpless. He assumes I have no options." She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. "That will be his greatest mistake." I left that cafe with a storm of feelings in my chest. Pride for my friend who'd just demonstrated more courage and strategic brilliance than anyone I'd ever met. Fear for what was coming, for the battle about to begin. And something else too, something I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the realization that the woman I thought I knew, my kind-hearted Cass, who cried at commercials and rescued stray animals, had also been secretly building a multi-million-dollar empire while her husband believed she was playing housewife. "Record everything," she told me as we walked toward the subway. Final piece of advice, wisdom earned from 6 years of surviving a marriage to a man who would have gladly destroyed her. Save screenshots. Make audio recordings. Keep bank statements. When you're fighting someone who has more power, information is the only weapon you have. I thought it was solid advice, then the kind of thing you hear and agree with, tucking away without ever expecting to need it. I had no idea how soon those words would become my own lifeline. The weeks that followed were thick with tension. Cass played her role to perfection. The devoted pregnant wife who suspected nothing, who spent her time worrying about nursery decorations and baby name lists, all while her husband continued his affair with increasing boldness. She smiled when Garrett came home late, reeking of Sienna's perfume. She nodded understandingly when he claimed his weekend trips were unavoidable work emergencies. She waited. She watched. She documented everything. She called me one afternoon, her voice filled with excitement she could barely contain. I have his entire escape plan, every detail, the accounts in Nevada, the research on which states don't cooperate with New York financial investigations, the fake identity documents he's been preparing. Fake identity documents. He'd been setting this up for longer than anyone had guessed, creating a complete second identity ready to deploy. The second things got difficult. He's completely unaware that I have copies of every document. He thinks his secret email is secure because he chose a password he assumed I'd never figure out. He doesn't realize I installed monitoring software on his laptop 3 years ago. Good God, Cass. I know it sounds extreme. She almost sounded giddy with triumph. But you have to understand my perspective. I've lived with this man for 8 years. I know exactly what he's capable of. I understood from the beginning that if our marriage ever fell apart, I needed insurance. What are you going to do with all this evidence? Nothing for now. I'm going to wait until the baby is born, until she's safe and healthy and protected, and after that I'm going to burn his entire world to the ground. It was the first time she'd said the baby's name out loud to me. Grace. She was naming her daughter Grace. And in that moment, despite everything, I truly believed it was all going to be okay. I was certain Cass had planned for every contingency that she was going to come out on top. I should have known better, should have remembered that real life doesn't follow a script, that even the most carefully constructed plans can shatter against events no one could predict. 3 terrible things happened in the space of 2 weeks, one after another, like dominoes set up by a cruel hand. The first catastrophe came without warning. Cass was at Jefferson Elementary during a routine parent-teacher conference discussing one struggling student's reading improvements when she felt a sudden sharp pain tear through her belly, followed by warmth spreading down her legs. She looked down and saw red spreading across the tile floor. The next hours were a blur of sirens, hospital hallways, doctors speaking in urgent tones. Emergency cesarean section at 32 weeks. The placenta had torn away. They had to operate immediately or lose them both. Grace Ashford entered the world at 4:15 in the afternoon on a rainy Thursday in September, weighing 4 pounds 3 ounces of pure fight. She was immediately taken to the NICU, where tubes and monitors would keep her alive while her tiny body learned what nature hadn't given her enough time to master. Cass barely survived the surgery. She lost a terrifying amount of blood. Her blood pressure dropped so low the doctors weren't certain she'd make it through the night. But she did. Because Cass had never been someone who gave up. Because she had too much left to do. She woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed, weak as a newborn, her body one massive collection of pain and exhaustion. The first thing she asked for was Grace. The second thing she asked for was her phone. She was powerless to execute her plan from a hospital bed. Couldn't meet with Wallace. Couldn't monitor Garrett's accounts. Couldn't finalize the legal documents meant to protect her daughter. Every day she spent in recovery was another day for Garrett to potentially discover what she'd been building, to find some way to reverse the situation, to flee to Nevada before she had the strength to stop him. I visited every day, bringing magazines she never read and smoothies she could barely sip. Watched her grow more stressed as her body refused to heal on her schedule. She was supposed to be in control, supposed to be strong. Instead, she was trapped in a hospital bed at the mercy of doctors and nurses and a husband whose visits were rare and always brief. That first catastrophe was the loss of her time, her strength, her control. The second disaster arrived 3 days later in the form of a visitor Cass never saw coming. Margaret Ashford walked into the hospital room with a bouquet of flowers and a cashmere baby blanket, wearing casual elegance that probably cost more than I earned in a month. She kissed Cass's cheek with lips that had never known genuine warmth, then settled into a chair like she planned to stay. "I'm here to help. Marcus is just so swamped with work, and you need someone to take care of you while you recover. We're family after all." Cass was too drained to fight, too exhausted to see the quick, hungry glances Margaret shot toward her phone on the nightstand, her laptop in the bag near the window, too medicated to recognize the predator in plain sight. I arrived that afternoon carrying cookies and a new book I thought Cass might like. Pushed her door open gently, expecting to find her resting alone or with a nurse doing routine checks. Instead, I saw Margaret leaning over Cass's bedside table with Cass's phone in her hands, scrolling through it with fierce concentration. Cass was fast asleep, machines beeping their steady rhythm medication keeping her sedated so her body could heal. She had no idea what was unfolding 3 feet from where she lay unconscious. "Margaret," my voice cut sharp enough to slice through the quiet. She snapped her head up. For a split second I saw triumph flash across her face, the look of a hunter finally trapping prey. Just as quickly it vanished, replaced by a pleasant smile and an innocent expression that would have fooled anyone not paying attention. "Harper, honey, I was just making sure Cass hadn't received any urgent messages. You know how she worries about that little business she runs." She placed the phone back on the table, gathered her belongings with unhurried movements. "I have to get going, but I'll be back in the morning. Make sure she rests." She breezed out without a hint of guilt, leaving behind expensive perfume and a cold, heavy feeling in my stomach that something terrible had just occurred. The moment Margaret left, I grabbed Cass's phone. I didn't have her password, but the lock screen showed recently used apps. Email, notes, documents, all opened within the past hour. I shook Cass awake, explained everything. As I spoke, color drained from her face. Her hands shook when she took the phone and looked through the history, confirming every app Margaret had accessed. Emails concerning the divorce, texts to Wallace, files that mentioned Meridian and its $52 million valuation. "She knows," Cass whispered, barely audible. "She knows all of it." That night, Margaret made a call to Garrett. We only learned later, when all the terrible pieces came together, what she revealed. She told him about Cass's secret company, the divorce papers being drafted, all the evidence Cass had collected against him. She laid it all out like a gift. The next morning, Garrett descended on the hospital like a hurricane. He barged into Cass's room just as she was attempting to breastfeed Grace for the first time. Her body was still incredibly weak, mind hazy from medication. The baby wasn't latching, and Cass was already crying from frustration when her husband suddenly appeared, standing over her bed with fury in his eyes. "You actually think you can leave me?" His voice came out as a venomous hiss, quiet enough to avoid nurses in the hall, but sharp enough to wound. "You think your little website for teachers is going to scare me? I know everything now, Cassandra. My mother told me absolutely everything." He moved closer, close enough she could smell coffee on his breath. "I will ruin you in court. I will take Grace from you. My mother will testify that you're mentally unstable, that this pregnancy has broken your mind, that you're an unfit mother. You will never see your daughter again." Hospital security finally escorted him out 10 minutes later after a nurse heard Cass's sobs and came to investigate. But the damage was done. All her careful strategies, detailed preparations, dreams of decisive victory were shattered by her mother-in-law's betrayal and her husband's uncontrolled rage. She cried for hours after he left, just holding Grace tightly and sobbing until she had no tears remaining. Cried until her eyes were swollen shut and her voice was gone, and the heart monitor beside her bed began to sound an alarm. That was the second catastrophe, the loss of her secrets, her advantage, her element of surprise. The third was the most devastating of all. In the days that followed, Cass's health took a sharp downturn. The doctors said it was an infection, but they seemed confused by how aggressive it was. They gave her powerful antibiotics, but her condition only worsened. Her fever climbed dangerously high. Her organs started showing signs of distress. Her recovery, which should have been progressing, was now going in reverse. I started noticing something strange during Margaret's daily visits. She would arrive acting deeply concerned, bringing what she called a special herbal tea from a wellness company in Connecticut. She insisted it would speed up Cass's healing. "This is an old family recipe. My grandmother swore by it. My mother used it. It contains healing properties you just can't get from modern medicine." Cass would drink it out of politeness, wanting to avoid another argument when she felt too weak to defend herself. The night after Margaret's third visit with the tea, Cass's monitor began to shriek. "Code blue. Crash cart to room 417. The calm voice announced over the hospital's speaker system. I was in the waiting room having dozed off in a horribly uncomfortable chair because I hadn't left the hospital in 3 days. I heard the announcement and cold dread washed over me. I knew it had to be Cass. I sprinted to her room, pressed my face to the window, watching in horror as a team of doctors and nurses surrounded her bed. Her heart had stopped beating. Her organs were shutting down. She was dying right there in front of me, and all I could do was stand there and pray to a God I wasn't even sure I believed in anymore. They managed to bring her back twice. After the second time, they weren't confident she would make it through the night. But she did. She was a fighter. When she finally opened her eyes the next morning, I was right there by her bed, clutching her hand like my touch alone could keep her anchored to this world. She looked at me with a startling clarity that cut through the haze of drugs and exhaustion. Then she spoke 3 words that changed everything. "Margaret is poisoning me." I started to dismiss her words as paranoia brought on by fever, as anything but the truth. But my own gut was screaming. "I saved the cup." Her voice came out faint but firm. "The last cup of tea she brought me. It's inside the drawer of my nightstand. You have to get it tested. And make sure you get samples of my blood and hair from the hospital with documented chain of custody." She gripped my wrist with surprising strength. "I'm not going to survive this. I can feel it taking over, but I refuse to let them win. Not Margaret, not Garrett, none of them." She made me swear to her that day. I had to promise to play the video she'd recorded to ensure everyone was watching when the truth was revealed, to protect Grace no matter what happened. I made those promises and meant every word. I just had no idea what it would cost me to keep them. Cass was transferred to hospice care on a rainy Tuesday morning exactly 3 weeks after Grace was born. The infection had spread, defeating every antibiotic the doctors tried. Her organs were failing in slow motion, shutting down one by one like a beautiful machine grinding to a halt. The doctors were completely stumped and frustrated. A healthy 32-year-old woman shouldn't get this sick this fast. They kept saying there had to be something they were missing. I knew exactly what they were missing. I'd already sent the teacup to a private lab for analysis, paying with money from a secret emergency account Cass had insisted I set up. The results were going to take time Cass no longer had, but I knew what they would find. Detective Ainsley Vaughn found me sitting in the hospital cafeteria the day before Cass was moved to hospice. She was a tough-looking woman, 45 years old, with 20 years on the force. She had that weathered face and sharp eyes that come from seeing humanity's worst and still finding a way to carry on. I knew her mother, Dorothy Monroe. I worked a case at her diner years ago, right after I graduated from the academy, back when I still thought I could change the world. She was the kindest woman I'd ever met. Her daughter was too, from what I recall. She took a long drink of terrible cafeteria coffee and looked at me closely. "Something isn't right about this situation. Healthy young mothers don't just decline like this for no reason. The medical team is stumped, which usually means they're avoiding a possibility they really don't want to consider." "What are you trying to say?" "I'm saying that I'm looking into this quietly off the record for now until I can find something concrete. But if you know anything at all that could explain why a healthy young woman is dying in that hospital bed upstairs, you need to tell me now." I explained everything. The teacup, Margaret's constant visits with her special herbal tea, Cass's certainty that her mother-in-law was trying to kill her. Vaughn listened quietly, her face growing more serious with every detail. "Get me the lab report," she said as soon as I finished, "and any other notes Cass kept. If my suspicion is correct, we're going to need every single piece of proof we can find." Cass spent her final days in a hospice room with a window overlooking a garden she was too frail to ever walk in. Late afternoon sun poured through the glass, bathing everything in warm golden light. Machines beside her bed beeped in soft, steady rhythm, counting down the little time she had left. I was there every day, holding her hand, talking about everything and nothing. Some days she was perfectly clear, her mind sharp as ever, even through the haze of medication and her failing body. Other days she would drift in and out, murmuring about butterflies and lesson plans and a little girl named Grace she would never get to see grow up. The last time she was completely lucid, she had me renew my promises. I wrote letters, one for every birthday until Grace turns 18, for her first day of school, her first broken heart, her graduation, even her wedding day. Tears started rolling down my face. Let me finish. She gripped my hand with strength that surprised me. My words will be there for her even when I can't be. I wrote other letters too, for Garrett, for Sienna, for Margaret, a completely different kind of letter. The type they won't be able to ignore or deny or pretend they never received. A faint smile touched her lips, weak and sad, but still showing the fierce spirit that was so uniquely Cass. They believe I'm dying defeated and broken. They think they won, that they got away with it all, that the girl from the trailer park finally got what was coming to her. They have absolutely no idea what's about to happen, not a clue. She paused, taking a ragged breath. I spent the last 6 years building a $52 million empire while my husband assumed I was at home making worksheets about butterflies. I beat him in a game he never even realized he was playing. She gave a quiet laugh that turned into a cough, her small frame shaking from the effort. Promise me you will play the video. Promise me that everyone will be there to see it. Especially Margaret, especially Garrett, especially his Instagram princess. I promise. Promise me you will look after Grace, that you will raise her to be a strong woman. Tell her about me, the real me, not the victim they're going to try and paint me as. Tell her that I fought for her until my very last breath. I promise, Cass. I promise all of it. She passed away at 3:47 in the morning on a cold Tuesday in October. I was the only person with her holding her hand as the monitors went flat, and a deep silence fell over the room. The nurses came in and out. The hospice chaplain spoke words I couldn't hear. Outside, the rain that had been falling all day finally stopped, and the first trace of dawn started to brighten the dark sky. Her final words were a whisper so quiet I almost didn't catch them. Make them watch Harper. Every last one of them. I will, I whispered back, even though she was already gone. I certainly will. Now we were back at St. Michael's Cathedral. Wallace Pritchard stood at the podium holding that envelope in his weathered hands. A crowd of 250 people held their collective breath, waiting to discover what Cassandra Monroe Ashford had left behind. Garrett sat in the front row with Sienna right next to him, looking more irritated than worried. He clearly thought this was just a formality, a quick reading that would leave him everything as the grieving husband. He had no idea what was about to unfold. Wallace's voice filled the cathedral with firm, clear authority. I, Cassandra Ann Monroe Ashford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this document to be my last will and testament. He read the introduction slowly, deliberately building suspense in a way that made even me want to shout for him to just get to the point. And then he delivered the first shocking revelation, and the entire atmosphere changed. To my daughter Grace Elizabeth Ashford, I leave all of my shares in Meridian EdTech, a company I founded and built from the ground up over the last 6 years. These shares will be held in a secure trust managed by my dear friend and sole trustee Harper Sinclair until Grace turns 25 years old. He stopped to let the words sink in. At the time of my passing, Meridian EdTech was valued at $52 million. Current financial forecasts predict the company's value will grow to $71 million within the next 2 years. A loud gasp echoed through the cathedral. Garrett's head shot up, his look of boredom instantly replaced by confusion, which then twisted into something that looked like pure terror. That's not possible. He spoke loud enough for the whole church to hear. She sold teaching plans online. She made maybe $200 a month. Wallace looked down at him with the kind of patient disdain a teacher might have for a student who just isn't very bright. Mrs. Ashford was the sole owner and chief executive officer of Meridian EdTech, the single largest platform for independent teacher resources in the United States. The company was founded before you were married and was structured within a trust that ensured it was completely separate from any marital assets. You were not aware of its existence because Mrs. Ashford made the choice not to tell you. Margaret jumped to her feet, her composure finally cracking. This is fraud. She was hiding assets from her husband. That is illegal. It is perfectly legal. Wallace's response came calm and measured. The company was started before the marriage. All of its growth was financed by its own revenue, not with marital funds. I have 6 years of documentation proving Mrs. Ashford built this business entirely on her own without a single penny from Mr. Ashford. I suggest you sit down, Mrs. Ashford. Margaret didn't sit. She just stood there trembling with fury until Garrett finally yanked her back down into the pew. Garrett tried to regain his composure. I watched him physically pull himself together, adjusting his tie and schooling his features into something calmer. Fine, whatever. As Grace's father, I will be the one to manage her trust until she's an adult. The money will stay within the family. Wallace didn't even blink. I have not finished, Mr. Ashford, and I think the next part will address your assumption regarding parental rights. He clicked a button on a small remote and a large screen lowered from the ceiling behind the coffin. Cass's face filled the screen filmed from her hospice bed only days before she died. She looked awful, so thin and pale with dark circles beneath her eyes. Her body was clearly giving out, but her eyes were bright and fierce with an almost playful look that made my heart ache with both pride and sadness. "Hello, Garrett." Her voice came faint but clear through the church speakers. "Sienna, Margaret, if you are seeing this, it means I am gone, and you are all probably feeling very pleased with yourselves right now." She let the silence hang in the air, watching from beyond death as her enemies processed what they were hearing. The cathedral had gone completely still. Not even the sound of breathing broke the quiet. Surprised about the money, of course, but you're already thinking you'll figure it out. You assume you'll get custody of Grace, take control of the trust, find some legal loophole your overpriced lawyers missed. You think you've won. You always think you've won because people like you can't even comprehend a world where someone like me could possibly outsmart you. She paused, and a small smile appeared that sent a chill down my spine, even though I'd seen this video 3 times already. You have no idea what's coming. So I suggest you sit down, shut your mouths, and listen closely. Class is now in session. The video continued playing, and with every word Cass spoke, the world that Garrett, Sienna, and Margaret had built for themselves started to crack. "Sienna, I want to thank you." Cass's voice carried a note of genuine appreciation that made Sienna flinch in her seat. "I know how odd that must sound, but just listen. When I first discovered you were having an affair with my husband, I was completely shattered. I think I cried for 3 days straight. I felt like my life was over, that everything I had worked so hard for had been ruined by a 28-year-old influencer who couldn't respect the boundaries of another woman's marriage." She shifted slightly in the hospice bed, the movement clearly causing pain. "But then I got angry. And after I got angry, I got smart. When I started to really look into all of Garrett's little secrets, I stumbled upon something fascinating about my own life. Something I had never even thought to question before." Documents flashed on the screen behind her. Bank statements, wire transfers, email chains, all bearing the letterhead of Morrison and Ashford. Garrett Meridian EdTech wasn't just my company. It was your target. Your firm has been negotiating to acquire Meridian for the past 11 months. You've been in meetings about it. You've reviewed financials. You've discussed valuation and market position and strategic fit. Garrett's face turned the color of old newspaper gray and lifeless. "You just never knew who the CEO was, because I used a corporate structure that kept my identity completely private. Every document you saw listed ownership under E. Hayes Holdings, LLC. You never thought to ask who E. Hayes was. You never imagined it could be your wife." She leaned forward slightly, the camera catching every detail of her expression. "But here's the truly beautiful part. I knew you were trying to acquire my company 6 months before you started the affair with Sienna. I knew because I have people inside your firm who keep me informed. And I realized something important. If you were coming after Meridian, you'd start looking for any advantage you could find, any piece of insider information, any edge." The documents on screen changed. Screenshots of their apartment, their home office, their shared spaces. So I started leaving my laptop open. Just accidentally, you understand, with files clearly visible on the screen. Financial projections for Meridian, market analysis, customer acquisition costs, strategic expansion plans. Garrett's hands had started to shake. He knew where this was going. Except every single number in those files was fake. Inflated projections, false revenue streams, fabricated partnership deals. I created an entire fictional version of my company and left it where you couldn't help but see it. She smiled, and it was the most dangerous expression I'd ever seen on her face. You took the bait every single time. I'd leave a file open showing Meridian was about to close a deal with the California school system. 2 days later, Morrison and Ashford would buy stock in educational technology companies that service California. I'd leave notes about expanding into special education software. A week later, you'd make trades in companies that manufacture assistive technology. The screen now showed a detailed timeline, dates when files were left open, dates when corresponding trades were made. The pattern was undeniable. You committed insider trading, Garrett, dozens of times over 6 months. You used confidential information from a company acquisition target to inform your personal trading strategy. She paused, letting the full weight of that land. You didn't steal from a mystery CEO. You stole from the woman you called nothing. You traded on information from your own wife, and every single instance is documented. Audio recordings of you discussing trades with colleagues. Written notes in your handwriting referencing information that only appeared in my fake files. Trade confirmations that match up perfectly with the timeline. Her voice hardened into something that could cut glass. The SEC received full documentation this morning. By the time you're watching this, federal agents are probably already on their way. Sienna had gone completely pale, her perfectly made-up face now looking like a mask about to crack. Oh, Sienna, did you think I forgot about you? Cass's attention shifted. That Tiffany necklace Garrett gave you for your birthday, the one you posted on Instagram with all those heart emojis that was bought with embezzled client funds, the weekend in the Hamptons, embezzled money, the Louboutins you're wearing right now to my funeral, embezzled money. Documents flashed showing credit card statements, receipts, wire transfers, every purchase meticulously documented. You are an accessory to financial crimes, Sienna. You received property purchased with stolen money. That makes you criminally liable. The FBI has the receipts, all of them, including the ones where Garrett used client trust accounts to fund your lifestyle. Sienna made a small noise in her throat, something between a whimper and a gasp. She started to stand, but Garrett grabbed her wrist, yanking her back down. Then Cass's expression changed. The playfulness vanished, replaced by something colder and infinitely more serious. Now for Margaret, my dear mother-in-law. Margaret flinched as if she'd been slapped. Her composure, which had already been fracturing, finally shattered completely. Her face twisted into something ugly. Detective Vaughn, I know you're here. I personally asked Wallace to invite you. I watched as Ainsley Vaughn moved through the crowd, her badge already visible on her belt. Her expression was the professional blank mask of someone who knew exactly what was coming. I believe Margaret Ashford has been poisoning me. Cass's voice stayed calm, almost clinical. It was in the herbal tea she brought to my hospital room every single day for 3 weeks. I saved the last cup. It is currently being held as evidence by my attorney, Mr. Pritchard, with a fully documented chain of custody from the moment it left my hospital room to the moment it entered the lab for testing. Margaret tried to move toward the aisle, but Vaughn was already there, blocking her path with practiced ease. I also saved samples of my own blood and hair from the hospital taken during my final week of treatment. Also documented, also held as evidence. The test results should be available now. Cass looked directly into the camera, directly at Margaret. I suspect they will show high levels of thallium, a heavy metal that mimics the symptoms of natural illness. Nearly impossible to detect without very specific testing. It causes organ failure that looks exactly like an aggressive infection. It's slow, it's subtle, and it's absolutely deadly when administered consistently over time. Margaret's voice came out as a screech that echoed off the cathedral's stone walls. This is insane. She was paranoid. The pregnancy affected her mind. I never poisoned anyone. This is defamation. I will sue everyone involved in this circus. On the screen, Cass seemed to have anticipated this exact reaction. Margaret will probably say I was mentally unstable, paranoid, delusional. She'll claim pregnancy hormones made me irrational. But I want everyone here to consider something. I was a straight-A student my entire life, National Merit Scholar. I built a $52 million company while working full-time as a teacher, and everyone around me thought I was just making worksheets about butterflies and frogs. Does that sound like a person who has lost her grip on reality? She took a breath, and for the first time emotion cracked through her controlled facade. Margaret, you killed me because I wasn't good enough for your son. Because I came from a trailer park in Tennessee and you come from old Connecticut money. Because my mother was a waitress and yours was a debutante. Because I threatened your perfect bloodline with my poverty and my ambition and my refusal to disappear quietly when your son decided he was done with me. Detective Vaughn's hand rested on the handcuffs at her belt. You poisoned me slowly over 3 weeks. You watched me deteriorate. You saw my organs failing, and you kept bringing that tea, kept smiling. That cold smile kept playing the concerned mother-in-law while you murdered me. The screen changed to show lab results. Official letterhead from an accredited toxicology lab. The numbers were clear and damning. Thallium sulfate, 15.7 milligrams accumulated in my system over 21 days. The lethal dose is between 1 and 2 milligrams. You gave me enough poison to kill 7 people, Margaret. You didn't just want me dead, you wanted me to suffer. Vaughn moved toward Margaret, pulling the handcuffs from her belt. Margaret Ashford, you are under arrest for the murder of Cassandra Monroe Ashford. The words seemed to echo in the vast space of the cathedral. Murder, not manslaughter, not negligent homicide. Murder. Margaret tried to pull away, but Vaughn was faster practiced professional. The handcuffs clicked into place with a sound that seemed impossibly loud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Margaret was screaming now, thrashing against Vaughn's grip, all pretense of dignity abandoned. I have rights. I want my attorney. This is a setup. That woman was crazy. She was always crazy. Garrett, tell them she was unstable. But Garrett wasn't listening. He was staring at the screen where Cass's face had reappeared, and whatever he saw there made him look like a man watching his execution. One more thing, Garrett. One final truth before I let you go. Her voice had gone soft, almost gentle. It was somehow more terrifying than anything that had come before. Grace isn't your daughter. The cathedral erupted into chaos. People were shouting, gasping, jumping out of their seats. Garrett's face went through a series of expressions too fast to track. Shock, denial, confusion, horror. DNA test results appeared on the screen. Official documents from a certified laboratory, the kind that would hold up in any court in the country. Probability of paternity 0.00%. Garrett Ashford is not the biological father of Grace Elizabeth Ashford. Cass's voice continued over the stunned silence. I had an affair 3 years ago, just one time, at an education conference in Boston. I met someone who treated me with genuine kindness, who asked about my work and actually listened to the answers, who saw me as a person instead of a trophy or a project to fix, who made me feel like I mattered. She paused, and I saw tears gathering in her eyes on the screen. His name is Brennan Caldwell. He's an investment banker, a good man. We spent one night together right after I discovered your first major gambling debt, the one you swore was a mistake that would never happen again. The DNA results showed a second name, Brennan Caldwell. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. I'm not proud of it. I was raised to believe marriage vows meant something. But I'm not sorry either, because that one night gave me Grace, and she is the best thing that ever happened to me. Her expression hardened again. You have no biological claim to my daughter Garrett, no parental rights, no legal standing for custody. The man who actually fathered her will be contacted by my attorney. The choice of whether to be involved in her life will be his and Grace's alone. You have no say in the matter. She leaned back against the hospice pillows, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. But I'm not done with you yet, because we still need to talk about your work, about the real reason you wanted to acquire Meridian, about the crimes you've been committing for years. New documents flooded the screen. Bank records, casino receipts, wire transfers to offshore accounts, Gambling debts, $2.3 million, owed to some very unpleasant people in Atlantic City who have been extraordinarily patient waiting for their money. Embezzlement from Morrison and Ashford, $1.8 million. Stolen from client trust accounts over a period of 4 years. Wire fraud, money laundering, securities violations. She smiled, and it was the saddest, coldest expression I'd ever seen. I have documentation for all of it, bank statements showing the transfers, betting slips with your signature, emails where you discussed moving money from client accounts, recordings of phone calls where you made trades using inside information, shell companies in your name designed to hide the stolen funds. The screen showed a dizzying array of evidence, so much that it was impossible to take it all in, but the sheer volume made the point clear. I've already sent copies of everything to the SEC, the FBI, the IRS, and your firm's ethics board. By Monday morning, you will no longer have a law license. By Friday, you will probably be in federal custody. And those gentlemen in Atlantic City who have been waiting so patiently for their $2.3 million, they're going to be very interested to learn that their debtor has no way to pay them back. Garrett was shaking now, visible tremors running through his entire body. His $4,000 suit suddenly looked like costume clothing that no longer fit properly. But Cass had one more revelation to deliver. "Sienna, sweetheart, one final thing for you." Sienna, who had been trying to slowly inch away from Garrett, froze in place. "I know you've been selling Garrett's insider trading secrets to Nathan Briggs, his biggest rival at Morrison and Ashford, the man who's been trying to force Garrett out of the firm for the past 2 years. New emails appeared on screen, Sienna's personal account. Dozens of messages to an address registered to Nathan Briggs. I have the emails, the Venmo payments totaling $127,000 over 8 months. The text messages where you called Garrett a useful idiot who is too arrogant to realize he's being played. The texts appeared time-stamped and geotagged, Sienna's words laid bare for everyone to see. "He's so easy to manipulate. Just bat my eyes and he tells me everything about the firm's deals. Nathan is going to owe me big when this is done." Another message sent just 2 weeks before Cass died. "Can't wait to leave this fool and move on to something better. He actually thinks I love him. It's almost sad how desperate he is for validation." Garrett spun toward Sienna, his face contorted with rage and betrayal. "You were working for Nathan. You were destroying my career from the inside." Sienna's composure shattered like glass. Her voice came out high and panicked. "Garrett, I can explain. It wasn't like that. I was just protecting myself in case things went south. You were taking so many risks. I needed insurance. You were selling my information. I could go to prison because of you." "Oh, that's rich." Sienna's panic transformed into fury. "You're the one who embezzled millions. You're the one with massive gambling debts. You're the one who committed securities fraud. I just made sure I would be taken care of when you eventually screwed everything up like you screw up everything else." They screamed at each other right there in the front pew of the cathedral while 250 people watched and dozens of phones captured every word. My best friend's funeral had turned into the most dramatic spectacle any of them had ever witnessed. On the screen, Cass watched it all with an expression of grim satisfaction. Never underestimate a quiet woman. Her final words cut through the chaos like a blade. Still waters don't just run deep. Sometimes they're hiding a tsunami. And sometimes that tsunami has spent 6 years learning exactly where all the fault lines are. The video ended. The screen went dark. The cathedral fell into stunned silence broken only by Margaret's continued protests and Sienna's sobbing. Wallace stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. "That concludes the reading of Mrs. Ashford's last will and testament. The cathedral is now released to continue with the memorial service." But there would be no memorial service. Not really. Police cars were already pulling up outside. Vaughn had radioed for backup the moment the video started, knowing what was coming. Margaret was escorted out first, still screaming about her rights and her lawyers and how this was all a terrible mistake. The handcuffs glinted under the cathedral lights as officers guided her toward the doors. She tried to dig her heels in, tried to appeal to the crowd, tried everything except accept what was happening. Federal agents in dark suits entered through the side entrance. They moved with quiet efficiency toward Garrett, who was still sitting in the front pew looking like he'd been hit by a truck. "Garrett Ashford, you're under arrest for securities fraud, insider trading, embezzlement, and wire fraud." He didn't resist, didn't say a word, just stood up mechanically and allowed them to cuff his wrists behind his back. As they led him past me, our eyes met for a brief second. I saw nothing in his gaze, no remorse, no understanding, just empty shock. Sienna tried to run, actually bolted for the side door like she thought she could escape. 2 officers caught her before she made it 5 feet. She struggled, screaming something about how this wasn't fair, how she hadn't done anything wrong, how Garrett had forced her into everything. Nobody believed her, especially not after everyone had just watched her texts calling him a useful idiot. Within 30 minutes, the cathedral was nearly empty. The 250 guests had scattered phones in hand, already posting about what they'd witnessed. Dorothy sat in the front pew, crying quietly. Wallace stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder. I walked up to the casket, placed my hand on the polished wood. The white lilies surrounding it had started to wilt in the warmth of the cathedral. "You did it," I whispered. "You really did it." 2 weeks later, I got a call from Wallace asking me to come to his office. When I arrived, there was a man sitting in the waiting room, 40 years old, well-dressed in a way that suggested success without demanding attention. He stood when I entered, extending his hand. "Harper Sinclair, I'm Brennan Caldwell." His eyes were kind, genuine, filled with a grief that mirrored my own. We went into Wallace's office together. Brennan had already seen the DNA results, already knew he was Grace's father, already knew the woman he'd spent one night with 3 years ago had died protecting a daughter he didn't know existed. "I loved her." His voice came out quiet. "I know that probably sounds insane, one night together, but Cassandra was the most incredible woman I'd ever met. I thought about her every day after Boston, wondered if I should reach out, wondered if she ever thought about me." He looked down at his hands. "She never told me she was pregnant. I think she was trying to protect me. She knew Garrett would destroy anyone who threatened his control. She was always protecting people, even at cost to herself." Wallace slid documents across the desk. Custody arrangements, trust structures, legal frameworks for co-guardianship. "Cassandra was very specific in her instructions," Wallace explained. "Harper would be Grace's primary guardian, but she wanted Brennan to have the opportunity to be part of Grace's life if he chose to be. She left the decision entirely to him." Brennan didn't hesitate. "I want to be her father, not because of the money or the company or any of that, because she's my daughter, because she's part of Cassandra, because loving her is the only way I have left to love the woman who gave her to me." Over the following months, we built something unexpected. A family that didn't look like anything traditional, but worked better than most conventional arrangements I'd seen. Brennan moved to Brooklyn, found an apartment 2 floors above mine, close enough to be present for Grace every day, but not so close that we lived in each other's pockets. He learned how to change diapers and mix formula and sing off-key lullabies. He took parenting classes and read books and asked questions and showed up. Every single day he showed up. I took the bar exam and passed on the first attempt. Opened a small practice focused on estate law, inspired by watching Wallace work. The trust provided enough for me to be selective about cases to take on clients who needed help more than they needed to pay premium rates. Dorothy moved into a new house in Johnson City, Tennessee. Nothing fancy, but it had a garden where she could grow tomatoes and a porch where she could sit in the evenings. She video called every Sunday to talk to Grace, to watch her granddaughter grow through a screen. The news coverage was relentless for months. Margaret's trial became a media sensation. The prosecution presented the evidence Cass had collected: the teacup, the blood samples, expert testimony about thallium poisoning and how it mimics natural illness. Margaret's lawyers tried everything, claimed the evidence was fabricated, argued that Cass had been mentally unstable, suggested the poisoning was accidental contamination. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. came back with a verdict of guilty on all counts. First-degree murder, premeditated. Margaret was sentenced to life without possibility of parole. She died in prison 3 years later. Lung cancer. Dorothy didn't attend the funeral. Garrett's case took longer to resolve. The federal charges were complicated, spanning multiple agencies and years of criminal activity. His lawyers negotiated plea deals, tried to reduce sentences, argued for concurrent rather than consecutive terms. In the end, he got 25 years. Insider trading, embezzlement, securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering. The judge made an example of him, citing the betrayal of client trust and the sophistication of his schemes. Morrison and Ashford fired him via press release, calling him a disgrace to the legal profession. The Atlantic City creditors never got their $2.3 million, but they had long memories. Even in federal prison, Garrett wasn't safe from their reach. He spent most of his sentence in protective custody, looking over his shoulder. Sienna served 8 years on accessory charges and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. Her Instagram account was deleted. The 89,000 followers vanished overnight. When she was released, she moved to a small town in Oregon and got a job at a department store. No social media presence, no contact with her old life. Grace's first birthday fell on a Tuesday in October, exactly 1 year after Cass died. We kept the celebration small, just me and my daughter, Lily Brennan, Dorothy, and Wallace. Pink balloons filled my apartment. Lily had made a banner with uneven letters spelling out "Happy Birthday, Grace." The cake was chocolate with vanilla frosting, Grace's chubby hands already reaching for it before we'd finished singing. She smashed her first piece enthusiastically, getting more on her face than in her mouth, laughing that pure belly laugh that children have before the world teaches them to be self-conscious. After we cleaned up the cake disaster, I set up the television. Everyone knew what was coming. Cass had recorded 18 videos, one for each major milestone in Grace's life. Birthday messages from beyond the grave, a mother's love preserved in digital form. The room went quiet as Cass's face filled the screen. She looked so young, so tired, but her eyes were fierce and bright and full of a love so powerful it seemed to radiate through the recording. "My darling Grace, happy first birthday, baby girl." Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through. "If you're watching this, it means I'm not there to hold you or kiss your cheeks or watch you destroy your first birthday cake. I'm so sorry I couldn't stay. I fought harder than I've ever fought for anything, but some battles can't be won the way we want them to be." She smiled, and for a moment she looked like the Cass I remembered from college, young and full of dreams. "I need you to know something important. Everything I accomplished, I did it for you. I didn't build Meridian because I loved money or success. I built it to protect you. I wanted you to have armor, resources, independence, so you would never have to depend on anyone to survive. So when you choose to let people into your heart, it's because you want them there, not because you need them." Tears were streaming down my face. Dorothy was sobbing quietly. Brennan held Grace close, his own eyes wet. "Be brave, Grace. Be kind. Be smart. Work hard, but never so hard you forget how to laugh. Love with all your heart, but never lose yourself in the process. Stand up for those who can't stand for themselves. Question everything, especially when people tell you not to ask questions." She leaned forward, speaking directly to the daughter she'd never watch grow up. "And Grace, here's the most important thing I will ever tell you. Never let anyone convince you that you are nothing without them. You are everything. You are my everything. You are the daughter of Cassandra Monroe. That means you have strength inside you that no one can imagine." Her voice caught. "I will love you forever and always, no matter how much distance is between us. Happy birthday, sweetheart." The screen went dark. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We just sat there in the weight of that love, that fierce maternal devotion that transcended death itself. Lily was the first to break the silence. She climbed into my lap and wrapped her arms around my neck. "Grace is really lucky," she whispered. "Even though her mama is gone, she can still hear her say she loves her." She was right. Cass had found a way to stay present, to continue mothering from beyond the grave. 17 more videos waited. 17 more moments when Grace would hear her mother's voice telling her she was loved, she was strong, she was everything. 3 days after the party, a letter arrived at my law office. Federal Detention Center postmark. No return address, but I knew immediately who it was from. I opened it standing at my desk, looking out at the Brooklyn skyline. The letter was brief, written in Garrett's cramped handwriting. "Harper, this isn't over. My lawyers are investigating the DNA evidence. Something doesn't add up. As soon as I prove Grace is my daughter, I'm coming for custody. I'm coming for the trust. I'm coming for everything Cassandra stole from me. See you in court." I read it twice. Felt nothing. No fear, no anger. Just a calm certainty that Cass had prepared for exactly this. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was a folder I'd never touched, sealed with red wax and labeled in Cass's handwriting Phase 2. "If Garrett threatens Grace, open only if necessary." I broke the seal. Inside were documents that made everything revealed at the funeral look like a preview. Evidence of crimes so extensive, so thoroughly documented that it would bury Garrett for the rest of his natural life. Tax evasion going back 15 years. Bribing federal judges. Money laundering through shell companies in 7 states. Witness intimidation. Blackmail. And at the bottom, a handwritten note. "Harper, if you're reading this, it means Garrett is still fighting. Some men never learn. They get knocked down and keep swinging, not because they think they can win, but because surrendering would mean admitting they were always weak." Phase 1 was the funeral, the public revelations, his arrest. I hoped that would be enough. But I knew him better than he knew himself. That's why I prepared Phase 2. He has no idea what I discovered, what I saved, what I held back for this exact moment. He thinks the funeral was the end. He's wrong. Finish him, Harper. Do it for me, for Grace, and for every woman who was told she was nothing. The files are ready to send. Just press enter. Love always, Cassandra. P.S. Tell Grace her mama says hi. Tell Garrett checkmate. Attached to the note was a USB drive. I plugged it into my computer. The files were already prepared, organized, ready to send. Emails pre-addressed to the FBI, IRS, federal prosecutors, and the judge presiding over Garrett's current case. All I had to do was click send. I looked at Garrett's letter one more time. His threats, his arrogance, his absolute refusal to accept that he'd lost. Then I looked at the photo on my desk. Cass holding newborn Grace, both of them in the hospital just hours after delivery, before everything fell apart, when there was still hope that she might survive. I clicked send. The emails went out simultaneously to a dozen recipients. Within hours, federal prosecutors filed additional charges. The evidence was overwhelming, incontrovertible, enough to add another 20 years to Garrett's sentence. His lawyers tried to fight it, tried to claim the evidence was obtained illegally, that Cass had violated privacy laws, that the recordings were inadmissible. The judge disagreed. Everything had been obtained legally. Every recording had been made in Cass's own home, where she had full right to record. Every document was hers to keep and distribute as she saw fit. Garrett's attempt to challenge custody died before it even reached a courtroom. He had no biological claim, no legal standing, no rights to Grace whatsoever. He sent one more letter after that, much shorter, just 3 words. She won, finally. I never wrote back. Over the following years, Meridian EdTech continued to grow under the leadership of the CEO Cass had handpicked. The company reached a valuation of $112 million by Grace's 5th birthday. The Dorothy Monroe Scholarship Fund distributed over $30 million to children of single mothers, helping them afford college the way Dorothy had helped Cass. Grace grew up surrounded by love. Brennan was an attentive father, present for every milestone. I did my best to be the guardian Cass had trusted me to be. Dorothy video called weekly, watching her granddaughter grow from 1,000 miles away. On special occasions, we played Cass's videos, watched her face on the screen, heard her voice filling the room. Grace learned to recognize her mother not as an absence, but as a presence, a guiding force woven through her life. When Grace turned 7, old enough to understand, I told her the full story. Not all the details, but enough. About her mother's brilliance, her strength, her refusal to accept defeat even in the face of death. Grace listened with those same dark eyes Cass had, that same intense focus. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that made my heart stop. My mama was a quiet woman, but she was loud where it counted. I pulled her into a hug and cried into her hair because she understood. At 7 years old, she understood the lesson Cass had spent her whole life trying to teach. Power isn't in your voice. It's in your strategy, your patience, your refusal to let anyone else define your worth. Cass built an empire in silence. She destroyed her enemies from beyond the grave. And her daughter would grow up knowing that strength doesn't require volume, that the quietest people are often the most dangerous, that underestimating a woman who's been told she's nothing is the last mistake you'll ever make. I think about Cass every day, miss her with an ache that hasn't dulled with time. But I also see her everywhere, in Grace's fierce determination, in the scholarship recipients who send thank you letters, in every woman who walks into my office asking how to protect herself, her assets, her future. The story of Cassandra Monroe became legend in certain circles, whispered in law schools and business programs, the woman who turned the weapons used against her into the instruments of her victory, the quiet teacher who built an empire and brought down everyone who underestimated her. Some people call it revenge. I call it justice. Either way, it worked. And somewhere I like to think Cass is watching, seeing her daughter grow up free and fierce and financially independent, seeing the lives changed by her scholarship fund, seeing that her death, as terrible as it was, meant something. She spent her life being told she was nothing. She spent her death proving she was everything. That's the lesson Grace will carry forward. That's the legacy Cass left behind. Never underestimate a quiet woman, because she's not quiet at all. She's listening, learning, planning. And when she finally moves, it's already checkmate.